All right, it is noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Elena Whitaker. I'm the Water and Natural Resource Specialist with Iowa Learning Farms. So thank you for joining us for an Iowa Learning Farms conservation webinar, part of our series. Today's topic and presenter is Trisha Moore. She is an associate professor of biological and agricultural engineering at Kansas State. And her webinar is A River Runs Through It, Linking Urban and Rural Communities through Watershed Management. So I'll let you go ahead and take it away, Trisha.
Thanks, Elena. I will get my screen shared here. And thanks to you all for taking part of your afternoon, your lunch hour to come and listen to this seminar here. As introduced, I'm going to be talking to you about opportunities to link urban and rural communities through watershed management. And let's see, I didn't practice advancing my slides. Here we go. So I think I'm rolling now. Since I'll be talking about urban and rural partnerships, I think it's only appropriate to recognize, the partners whom I have relied heavily and benefited so much from through this work. So I would like to acknowledge my collaborators, Ron Graber, part of the Kansas State Research and Extension Network, as well as Rick Schlender, with whom we've worked very closely. Also K-Care in the city of Wichita, which has provided their institutional support throughout. And so let's get going. So as you may have noticed from the title, I've borrowed a famous title from literature and also cinema for those of you who have maybe watched the movie, but I'll just start with this image of the Blackfoot River, which is the main river of both the book and intended in the movie, A River Runs Through It. And I start here in part because this is part of my story. I love water, rivers, streams, lakes. I was drawn to them as a child, and it's a large part of why I do what I do now as a faculty member in the bio and ag engineering department at Kansas State. I continue to work in water systems, or have had that opportunity. However, my rivers do not look like this. My rivers maybe look like this. So this is the Smoky Hill River in north central Kansas. I also do some work in some agricultural streams, looking at ways to try to slow stream bank erosion. Also do a fair bit of work in urban watersheds, where many of our streams look kind of like this. And so I'm showing this spread of river pictures here to make the statement, many of you are aware, right? What we see in our river largely reflects what we're doing in our watershed. And so, thinking long back when we, initially converted some of our perennial native vegetation for annual cropping for the food production and fiber production that our society relies upon, that had an influence on our rivers, both the way they look and then in terms of the materials that they carry, their quality. Same story in urban areas, right? We build houses, we pave roads and driveways so that we can get the places we need and have the amenities that we need. And again, this impacts our rivers. These are certainly not, these types of sites, not just specific to Kansas, but I'm sure in Iowa you can see them, or wherever you happen to be, we have examples of rivers that are impaired to some extent. We can also look at a quality side. So I have another figure, this one showing a little bit more data, but this is from some modeling work that was done, just picking one, pollutant of common concern in many of our streams and rivers. And, this is looking at nitrate and some estimates of nitrate concentrations in streams throughout the US. And the point here is not to, I guess my point is to say, these pollutants are widespread, and it's not just nitrate. We could look at any number of different nutrients or other contaminants of concern. And we know that the concentrations that we see there are certainly high enough when we start getting into our lakes and even coastal systems to spark, algal blooms, some of them harmful in nature, that our nation and our communities, even here at home, are grappling with how to deal with. And so coming up with solutions to challenges like these, whether it's addressing erosive forces in our rivers, whether it's addressing the materials, the pollutants that they carry, and some of the downstream effects. It's challenging in and of itself, just given the magnitude. But then when we start thinking about how our landscape, our watersheds are divided into all of these different governing organizations. So this is just one example from the Minnehaha Creek watershed in the Twin Cities area where I once worked. We can all be governing or operating in a different set of rules, if you will. And we know that water doesn't care, it flows downhill. And so thinking of ways that we can get outside of our organizational boundaries, whether those are the municipalities that you might see on this screen, or what I'm going to talk to you more about today is looking upstream into our across our urban and into our rural parts of our watershed, how we can partner across those governing lines to better manage our water resources and be more effective in that. And so the outline for the rest of my talk is just that, thinking about watershed partnerships and opportunities to achieve our water management goals, water management goals. And in this talk, I'll start briefly just by discussing the watershed planning framework that we have here in Kansas, then give some example partnerships that I've been a part of where we're working between rural landowners and, in this particular case, a municipal stormwater utility, which I think is a unique partnership. And though I'll mention a few others as we go along. But what I specifically want to hit on with this particular partnership is thinking about the partners themselves. So who are playing in these types of partnerships, what their needs are, and maybe some challenges that, at least in my case, we've encountered in trying to meet those needs of all these different partners. And then as this program has rolled out and been implemented over the last several years, thinking about some of the progress and further opportunities. And so with that, let me introduce you first to what we have in Kansas for a watershed planning framework. So in Kansas, this framework for engaging our watershed stakeholders in this kind of watershed process is known as WRAPS, or the Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategy. And so this program provides a framework to engage the watershed stakeholders. And so that can be municipalities, it can be the landowners in those watersheds, as well as the organizations that help to serve those. So it can also include, for example, soil conservation districts, other NGOs, for example. But the WRAPS process, or the process that is kind of ushered through this framework, includes the 4 stages you see there, but essentially everything from identifying what the watershed restoration and protection needs are. So many of the watersheds in which this program has been implemented have identified impairments, including total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, for those of you familiar with that terminology. And so in coming into these impaired watersheds, in many cases, it helps the stakeholders identify the needs, establish goals, and then ultimately implement a plan to achieve those goals. And this particular planning process largely uses the EPA 9 elements planning framework as the basis for that plan, if you're familiar with that as well. But the point is that in the state of Kansas, we do have this watershed process because we recognize that, of course, to achieve our water quality goals that we have for these impaired waters, we need to take this watershed approach. This framework, though, has offered, I think, a launch point for some of the partnerships that I'm going to discuss with you. And so I'll next introduce the Little Arkansas River watershed, WRAPS. So this watershed has a WRAPS program in place that involves several sets of watershed stakeholders. Before I go there, though, the Little River, I'm having trouble speaking. The Little Arkansas River watershed is located in South Central Kansas. So hopefully you can see that in the lower left of your screen with the state and kind of its relative location there. The watershed is largely agricultural, as are many of our watersheds in Kansas, and I suspect in Iowa too, right? Here, the case is largely wheat with corn and soybean rotation, so majority cropland, which is the light tan color that you see, a little bit of rangeland in the west, and then some municipalities scattered throughout, which you can see in the purple shading. The largest of these is the city of Wichita, which is located at the southern point, which is also where the outlet of the watershed. Population of Wichita is the largest in the state of Kansas at just under 400,000 people. So as we start thinking about a watershed planning process for this particular watershed, of course, we have the municipalities, but also very importantly are those rural landowners and operators who are managing the majority of the watershed. The Little Ark River has had total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, described for both biology and total phosphorus. And there's a myriad of different water quality impairments that go into that biology impairment. And so with the TMDL and with this listed as an impaired water, then a very natural stakeholder, of course, in this process is the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, who is our state's equivalent of the Iowa DNR. Another feature of this watershed is that the Little Ark is a source of drinking water for the city of Wichita, and it's also monitored as part of the city's stormwater permit program. And so here now we have a couple of additional partners playing in, both the city of Wichita's drinking water utility, as well as the city's stormwater utility. And so with these partners, again, kind of makes for a launch point for some unique partnerships to come. And these partnerships in this case are pretty targeted. So two in this particular watershed that have been implemented over the last few, recent past includes a partnership that's driven primarily by the drinking water quality concerns from the city's water utility. The primary pollutant of concern there is atrazine, and there is a program in place through a partnership with K-State Research and Extension to have outreach and atrazine management plans for upstream producers. I'm not going to really talk about this one today, though if there's questions later, if we have time, I'm certainly happy to field some of those. This is really the child or the baby of one of my project collaborators, Ron Graber. But the one I'm going to focus on is driven by stormwater MS4 permit obligations. So first, let me unpack MS4. So if there's any of you in the audience from a stormwater background, then that probably sounds familiar. But if not, then MS4, that stands for Municipal Storm Sewer Separate. I am really bumbling this. Let me try again. Municipal storm sewer, separated storm sewer system. Okay, there's 4 S's, and I've managed to bumble them a couple of times, but essentially it's a stormwater oriented program. Okay, they have to have a permit. Any of these MS4 permit holders must hold a permit in order to discharge stormwater to any natural body of water. So even small municipalities, say maybe of only 10,000, 20,000 people, have these permits in place. And the city of Wichita certainly does. In the city of Wichita's case, sediment is a primary pollutant of concern, though of course there are others. But this is some of what they're tracking when they go and are taking water quality samples of rivers like the Little Ark. It's to see what is their stormwater impact, and then are they starting to make a difference through their permit. A little bit on what that, well, before I go to what the permit is, I want to say that between these two programs, I think that I have seen numerous opportunities and examples of these partnerships between urban and rural, where there is a drinking water utility that's driving that, and it's again, I think it's a positive thing to see these relationships. I think that this stormwater driven program is a little bit unique, or there's not as many of them, and so that's part of why I'd like to talk or share it with you today. What this permit program requires, it requires numerous things from any permit holder, but one of the main things is that after new development or redevelopment activity takes place, some sort of post-construction water quality best management practice, or BMP, needs to go into place. And so there's a lot of great stormwater management practices out there. Some of you I've seen Bill Hunt has maybe been a past speaker here. So maybe you've heard about green infrastructure or constructed wetlands, rain gardens, bioretention. There's some really great systems out there. Two of the most common, though, that we see in urban areas, and which do check the box for the post-construction BMP management, are things like constructed ponds and hydrodynamic separators. And the city of Wichita, like many cities, has a lot of these things, and they are quite costly. And so it was actually through the RAPS program and having some of this exchange with research and extension that the city became aware of some of the cost effectiveness and the fact that it can be much more expensive or less cost effective to manage water quality pollutants in urban areas versus what we can do upstream in agricultural areas. So some of these numbers were prepared by ag economist colleague of mine, but the point is not so much the numbers themselves, but just the relative magnitude, orders of magnitude of difference between what it takes to, say, manage a ton of sediment with a bioretention system or a hydrodynamic separator versus any of the suite of different agricultural conservation practices that we have at hand, and which producers are, maybe willing to adopt. And so recognition of this opportunity brought more stakeholders to the table. So the opportunity here being for both the environmental and economic effectiveness of how this meeting, or how efforts to meet water quality targets in the Little Arc was being met. So one of the first players to the table, and who actually brought this idea to the city of Wichita, was our Department of Health and Environment. The Department of Health and Environment provides regulatory oversight to the city of Wichita, specifically to its stormwater permit. And so they approach the city and say, hey, would you consider working upstream with landowners, perhaps through your permit program, being able to pay or incentivize conservation practices upstream in lieu of maybe doing some of these on-site urban BMPs, such as stormwater ponds and hydrodynamic separators. The city of Wichita was interested and already had a relationship with the developers, which are the other key player in this program. The developers are held accountable by the city of Wichita to implement some sort of post-BMP practice, or post-construction water quality BMP. The stakeholder the city then needed were the producers and the operators managing the watershed upstream of the city within the Little Arc watershed. And they don't naturally have that connection. And so that's how I got involved, as well as my colleagues, through K-State Research and Extension. In this overall program, we have relationship and then flow of information, both between the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the city, and then critically with the producers through Extension's history of involvement in the watershed and the relationships that have been developed there. And so, again, the RAPS framework provided this launch point with the need of the stormwater program to try to meet its environmental targets of this watershed in a more cost-effective manner. And then KDHE also seeing the environmental effectiveness also potentially being greater in the case that we're working upstream, as opposed to just staying in our municipal boundaries. And so as we began developing this partnership, each of these stakeholders had specific needs. So our regulatory agency, KDHE, sets the framework in terms of, saying the target pollutants that need to be addressed, identifying the target watershed, which again is the little arc watershed in this case. And then we need some mechanism to account for uncertainty in all of this. The city of Wichita had very low tolerance for risk, be it financial or from a regulatory standpoint. They didn't want to fall out of compliance with their stormwater permit. The developers at the table really just cared about the cost effectiveness from their perspective. The producers require some flexibility. So it's less likely that they would want to participate in a program that is very rigid or stringent in the types of off-site, which I'm calling them here, but the types of BMPs that would be implemented in those agricultural lands. And then our role, K-State Research Extension, was to make all of this work. So KDHE really set I think a needed skeleton for this program and identifying the primary pollutant of concern, which was identified as sediment. And then from that uncertainty piece that I mentioned on the previous slide, saying that there needed to be a 2-to-1 ratio. And what that means is that for every 1 ton of sediment that the city of Wichita might be producing in stormwater runoff through new or redevelopment activities, was going to require purchasing 2 tons of sediment credits upstream. And what a sediment credit is essentially they're paying for landowners to adopt new practices and implement them that are going to retain sediment, or maybe we should say retain soil on their landscapes. Okay, so this set again kind of the overall framework for the program. A challenge to then us was in balancing some of the city's needs with what we felt would be needed on the producer side. So the city of Wichita valued permanence of those offsite BMPs through which they'd be gaining or securing those sediment credits. So the city really came in thinking permanent structures like stream bank stabilization or conservation easements that they could purchase and hold and own as the city. From our previous work in the watershed, though, we saw more flexibility or likelihood of participation with practices such as buffer strips or no-till, cover crops, other sorts of practices, but not necessarily structures. And so to balance this, we worked a lot with the city, both on the education side and kind of understanding the role and also the cost effectiveness of these types of programs. But really, going through lots of iteration and even developing a program support tool to help the city understand, what different scenarios would look like in terms of replacement costs. If certain producers decided, say, not to continue with a practice like no-till after a certain amount of years, how much would it cost to replace those acres, and so forth. So ultimately, we were able to work through this challenge, but it just took lots of iterations and again some decision support tools that the city could use and wrap their hands around. With all of this, we finally were able to develop a cost for those offsite sediment credits, which the city now has a program in place where their developers can opt in to pay those costs, which then are paid upstream, rather than implementing, say, a hydrodynamic separator on their property. To set those costs, we were able to come up or use what we felt would be the most common BMP to be adopted in this region. So it was based on no-till with either cover crops or some sort of intensive crop rotation to maintain growth. We also accounted for replacement costs, assuming that if a producer came in and after their contract was up, they might decide to discontinue, and that we would have enough funding in our bin to go out and enroll new acres. We maintained a 2-to-1 sediment credit ratio. So again, thinking about that guidance from our regulatory agency. And then part of the cost also includes cost to engage a crop consultant who's going out to enroll and track those offsite BMPs. So again, on the ground, what this looks like is we work with an agronomist and crop consultant. That's Rick Schlinder, who I mentioned in the first page. He knocks on doors and finds willing participants to adopt new practices. They sign up for a 5-year period. During that period, the city of Wichita issues payments for providing a service here in terms of retaining soil on their property. And if at the end of that 5-year contract they decide not to continue, then we enroll new acres, and that is how that goes. On the city side, developers also have the decision whether or not they want to opt into this program and pay into this offsite program, or to, on the other hand, if they didn't do that, then they implement a more traditional on-site water quality BMP. To date, so this program has been going for since 2016. So I have data through at least the end of the last year. So not quite current to 2022, but fairly current here. So you can see that the number of new and redevelopments in the city of Wichita is about 250, representing about 400 hectares, or just around 1,000 acres of new properties that have opted into this program in the city. Through that, implemented about 1,000 acres of no-till with cover crops with upstream agricultural producers. So it's not like a big program, right? 1,000 acres is not a lot spread over this entire watershed, but when you're doubling this or adding it on to other incentive-based programs and other partnerships in the case of the city of Wichita, it's another way to make progress. From our modeling, we estimate that we have 75% less sediment load in the runoff that's ultimately making it to the city of Wichita at the outlet of the Little Arc. And to the city of Wichita, they've seen a huge economic benefit. These numbers are based on the difference, those capital savings and annual savings are on the cost to install and then maintain hydrodynamic separators, which is again kind of the water quality BMP practice of choice for developers in this region. And instead of that, we've infused a little bit more cash incentive to upstream producers to adopt some of these conservation practices. This definitely doesn't tell the whole story there, though, and so this is actually my last slide, so I'll kind of use this in conclusion. But if we start thinking about what else we can be gaining through these sorts of programs, particularly when the trade-off is coming, for a hydrodynamic separator, maybe even a little bit of additional storage volume in a stormwater pond, we're not just getting sediment removal, which is what we primarily get through those. We're getting soil retention. So soil versus sediment, there's a lot of value there. By having these conservation practices such as no-till and cover cropping, or maintaining that cover on the ground, we're getting other benefits such as carbon sequestration. This leads to broader soil health improvements, and there's a lot of work going on around soil health, and I'm very excited to see that. I know from my point as a watershed person, as a thinking about flows of water and materials through our watershed, I am particularly keen to think that we're getting, with some of these practices, improved soil and moisture holding capacity, higher infiltration rates, and with that we're going to see some difference in downstream hydrologic regulation. So with enough of these practices going in through the help of partnerships such as we see here with the city of Wichita and its upstream landowners, maybe we can also start to make a dent in some of the issues like flooding, and it's going to help, I think, also across our broader water quality issues. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk and just highlight again, though, that for certain, the challenges we face in watershed management are large, and there's not really a single silver bullet. But I feel, at least, that we can be certain that when we're partnering together, whether it's across municipalities, counties, state lines, or in this case, a municipality and upstream rural landowners, that we can make greater progress and produce a greater set of potential solutions than we can if we're working at it alone. So thank you for your attention, and I will turn it back over to you, Andrea, if we want to do questions.
Yeah, if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide really quick. Yep. So if you would like to earn CCA CEU credits, please email me, elenaw@iastate.edu by the end of today or 5 p.m. today with this information. And with that, we've got some questions already. The first question is a clarification question. Are developers and the city buying sediment credits from upstream farmers instead of investing in more pricey urban BMPs, or is that in addition?
Yes, that is what they're doing. So it's an in lieu program. The city, one caveat, so the city does still require that they address flooding, so localized flooding and downstream flooding. So they have to have some sort of practice in place to do that. But as far as the water quality piece goes, which is sometimes addressed in separate streams, even though they both go hand in hand, they are able to participate in this program in lieu of implementing more expensive urban treatments. Yes.
All right, so another question is, how does the crop specialist rank or decide which producers to contact to enroll in the program? And then also, what is the percentage of people contacted that ultimately enroll in the program?
Those are wonderful questions. So the places they target have been outlined through the RAPS process. So as part of that RAPS process, which I didn't go into, target or priority watersheds are identified, or priority subwatersheds. So areas within the Little Arc, which we think to be most prone to erosion in this case, or to contributing to that sediment load, are targeted first. And so that's kind of the working advice that the crop consultant has, is to basically we delineate an area and say, try to hit people in here. As to the participation rate, I assumed it was probably pretty high, since we being K-State Research and Extension has had work going on in this watershed over at least the past 20 years. But I asked this question actually not so long ago to the crop consultant, and he said that for about every 10 doors he knocks on, he gets one person who wants to adopt a new practice. So, but my guess is that maybe that's not all too uncommon. So, so part of this program does go to fund his effort in finding people who are willing to adopt. Yeah.
All right, and before we move on to our other questions, could you advance to the next slide?
Yes.
We want to talk about next week's webinar with Dr. Raj Raman here at Iowa State on developing large-scale, reliable perennial ground cover systems and the challenges and approaches from that. So that's for next week, Wednesday at noon. A couple more questions. Have you published any papers on this program?
Yeah, so we do have a paper in the Journal of Extension, and it is open access, but Elena, would there be a way I could maybe provide a link to that, or you could share with the listserv, or what's there?
Yeah, I can, if I can put a link in, we write webinar blog recaps, so I can get the link from you and have that posted, and it'll be on the Iowa Learning Farms blog.
Great, that would be awesome. So yes, it goes through more of the kind of the programmatic, similar to this talk, some of the relationships and how it all kind of worked out, but with greater detail. We're working on some other papers more on a modeling front and looking at, adoption over time and potential trade-offs and at the urban scale. But that's a ways in the making. But for sure, at the present time, we do have a publication in the Journal of Extension.
All right, and another question is, what watershed model or models are used to identify priority watersheds? Is the same watershed model or a different field scale model used to quantify practice benefits?
Very good. So the priority watersheds were identified using the SWAT model. The SWAT model is not necessarily required in the Kansas's RAPS process, but it was used in this particular case. For looking at those field scale estimates, so SWAT is I think very appropriate for looking at kind of at the watershed scale, but to get at the field scale, we did use, in this case, we've only used very simple universal soil loss equation, or Russell, we use revised. So some additional work can be done there, potentially in looking at, more mechanistic type models, but yeah, we did go to a field scale to look at the specific fields where we had adoption of practices through this program.
All right, perfect. I think we've answered all of the questions that are in the chat. So again, if you have CCA, CEU credits, please send them to me at elenaw@iastate.edu today by 5 p.m. You can watch this and other, oh wait, we got one more coming in. This project looks like it has a lot of agronomic and water quality technical support. Are there any social scientists working on it?
Oh, that we haven't engaged with social scientists yet. Pardon my dog. We've written some proposals around the idea with social scientists involved, but those haven't been funded. So at this point, I haven't worked directly with social scientists, but that's I think a true need, especially when we start thinking about adoption rates and, maybe again, knocking on 10 doors for everyone is, maybe we need to think about how we're targeting or messaging or otherwise. So, yeah.
All right, perfect. So again, you can watch this webinar and other webinars archived on our website. And I encourage everyone to check out our website. We just remodeled it. So if you go to iowalearningfarms.org, you can see our new revamped website and find this and past webinars. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.